The debt collector's dilemma. High Curator Vexter stared at the ancient communication device with trembling claws. His species, the Keelians, lived for 3 centuries, and at 240 years old, he had never felt so desperate. The crystalline spires of the great archives stretched endlessly around him, containing the accumulated knowledge of 47 civilizations spanning 12,000 years. Tomorrow, it would all belong to the Syndicate. The Galactic Commerce Syndicate had purchased the debt of his homeworld, Keelia Prime, standard corporate practice across the galaxy. When worlds couldn't pay their loans, their assets became property of their creditors. The Keelian government had borrowed heavily to fund their expansion into 3 neighboring systems, and the economic collapse of the Outer Rim had left them unable to service their debt. Legally, everything was proper. Morally, it was devastating. Vexter's long fingers traced the edges of the communication panel. He had sworn never to use this particular frequency again. 50 years ago, he had broken Galactic Federation protocol to warn a small human colony ship about impending danger. The act had cost him his position on the Federation Council and nearly resulted in his imprisonment. But those humans had survived because of his warning. Now, facing the destruction of everything he had spent his life protecting, Vexter activated the old emergency beacon. The response came faster than he expected. "This is Commander Zara Thorne, Earth Diplomatic Corps. We've been monitoring this frequency for 50 years. Curator, what do you need?" The voice was older now, weathered by decades of service, but unmistakably the same woman who had been a junior navigator on that colony. Ships so long ago. Vextar's throat tightened with emotion. He thought his ancient heart could no longer feel. "Commander Thorne, I need help. The archives are going to be seized by the Syndicate in 36 hours. They plan to strip mine our knowledge vaults and sell the information to the highest bidders. 12,000 years of accumulated wisdom, lost forever." There was silence on the channel for a long moment. When Thorne spoke again, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "Curator, you saved 12,000 human lives when you warned us about that stellar storm. We've never forgotten that debt. What exactly are we looking at here?" Vec explained the situation rapidly. The Syndicate had acquired legal ownership of Keelia Prime and all its assets. They had 48 hours to begin asset liquidation. The Great Archives contained the cultural and scientific heritage of nearly 50 species, many now extinct. Once the Syndicate processed it through their profit algorithms, most of it would be destroyed as commercially non-viable. "How big are we talking, Curator?" "The archive spans 7 continents. We estimate 47 billion individual knowledge crystals, each containing roughly a terabyte of information in your human measurements. The physical structure alone covers approximately 2,000 square kilometers." Another pause. Vextar heard muffled conversations in the background, voices speaking rapid English in urgent tones. "Curator, I'm going to ask you to trust us one more time. Can you delay the Syndicate for 72 hours instead of 48? Perhaps. My legal team believes we could file emergency appeals, claim cultural preservation rights. But Commander, even if I could give you a full week, what could you possibly do? The Federation Council has already approved the seizure. This is completely legal under interstellar commerce law. Legal doesn't mean right. You taught us that 50 years ago. We'll be in touch." The channel closed, leaving Vextar staring at the silent device. What had he just done? What could a single human, even a commander, do against the might of the Galactic Commerce Syndicate? 18 hours later, Vexstar got his answer. His assistant, a young Keelian named Maresh, burst into his private chambers with his sensory frills flashing panic signals. "Curator, you must come to the observation deck immediately. There are ships coming." Vexstar followed his assistant through the winding corridors of the archive complex to the main observation platform. What he saw defied belief. Human ships were dropping out of hyperspace in steady streams, but these weren't military vessels. The fleet was a chaotic mixture of everything humanity had that could travel between stars. Massive cargo haulers designed for asteroid mining, sleek research vessels from the outer colonies, converted passenger liners, privately owned yachts, even what appeared to be a collection of modified racing ships. "How many?" Vexter whispered. "Our sensors show over 15,000 vessels, and the number is still climbing." Moresh replied, his voice trembling with disbelief. A communication request chimed on the primary channel. Commander Thorne's face appeared on the main screen. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, Vexstar could see what looked like controlled chaos. Humans in civilian clothes worked alongside uniformed personnel. Children helped carry equipment, and elderly humans operated communications stations. "Curator, Vexter. This is Commander Thorne. Permission to begin landing operations." "Commander, I don't understand. What is all this?" Thorne smiled, and for a moment Vexstar saw the young navigator he had saved decades ago. "This is humanity, paying its debts, Curator. You saved 12,000 lives 50 years ago. Word spread. Every human who lived because of your warning, their children, their grandchildren, their friends and neighbors. They all remember. When we put out the call for volunteers, we had to turn people away. But what are you planning to do?" "We're moving your library, Curator, all of it." The scale of the operation that unfolded over the next 18 hours defied everything Vexstar thought he knew about logistics. The humans had come prepared with equipment he had never seen before. Massive gravity lifters that could move entire archive buildings, portable quantum storage devices that could compress terabytes of data into crystalline matrices, the size of his claw. But it wasn't just the technology that amazed him. It was the humans themselves. A teenage girl from the Mars colonies had developed a new compression algorithm specifically for Keelian knowledge crystals, increasing storage efficiency by 300%. An elderly professor from Earth University had learned to read ancient Keelian script and was personally cataloging the most fragile historical documents. Miners from the asteroid belts worked alongside university students. Corporate executives labored beside farmers, all united in a single purpose. Captain Marcus Chen, a grizzled fleet commander, coordinated the operation from his flagship, a retrofitted exploration vessel called the New Horizon. "Curator, we've got teams working around the clock," Chen reported. "My engineers estimate we can have 80% of your archives relocated within 48 hours. The critical stuff, anyway. The rest we'll grab as we go." "But where?" Vexter asked. "Where could you possibly put all of this?" "Ever heard of the human colony at Ross 128? Chen asked with a grin. "Beautiful world, lots of space. They voted unanimously to become the new home of the Keelian archives. Permanent sanctuary status. The way they see it, you helped save humanity once. Now we're returning the favor." As Vexter watched human teams work with impossible efficiency to dismantle and relocate his life's work, he began to understand something fundamental about this species. They didn't just remember debts of honor, they amplified them, passed them down through generations, made them part of their cultural DNA. The syndicate ships arrived right on schedule, expecting to take possession of a planet and its assets. Instead, they found 15,000 human vessels and the most massive relocation operation in galactic history. Syndicate Director Voss materialized on the communication screen, his reptilian features twisted with fury. "Commander Thorn, you are interfering with a legal, commercial operation. Remove your ships immediately or face the consequences." Thorn's response was calm and professional. "Director Voss, we're not interfering with anything. We're simply helping our friends move their belongings. All perfectly legal under Galactic Federation law. Article 247 of the Commerce Code clearly states that personal property can be relocated prior to asset seizure, provided it doesn't damage the underlying real estate. The archives are not personal property. They are planetary infrastructure. Actually," a new voice interrupted, "they're not." An elderly Keelian appeared on screen beside Thorn. Vexstar recognized him as Juresh, one of the planet's most respected legal scholars. "Director Voss, I've just filed the appropriate paperwork with the Federation Commerce Commission. As of 6 hours ago, the Keelian archives were donated in perpetuity to the Human Colony Development Foundation. The knowledge crystals, the storage systems, even the building materials are now human property. The humans are simply collecting their belongings." Voss's tail lashed with rage. "This is preposterous. You can't just give away planetary assets." "I can, and I did," Juresh replied calmly. "The donation was made before the seizure took legal effect, all properly filed and notarized. I've been practicing interstellar law for 90 years, Director. I know what I'm doing." As the first archive transport ships began jumping to hyperspace, carrying the precious knowledge crystals to their new home, Vexstar felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. But the syndicate wasn't finished. Director Voss's image reappeared on the communication screen, this time flanked by a massive fleet of corporate security vessels. "Commander Thorn, you have 1 hour to cease operations and surrender the stolen archives, or we will consider this an act of piracy and respond accordingly." Thorn's expression didn't change, but Vexter noticed the communications officer behind her smile grimly. "Director Voss, I should probably mention that 15 minutes ago, the Galactic Federation received a formal complaint about syndicate business practices from the Keelian government. Something about forced cultural destruction and violation of the heritage protection protocols. The Federation Council has issued an emergency injunction suspending all asset seizures pending investigation." "Impossible. The Council would never." "Oh, but they would," Thorn interrupted. "Especially when the complaint was filed simultaneously by 57 different species whose cultural heritage is stored in the archives. Turns out, a lot of civilizations have strong feelings about protecting their history. Who knew?" As the syndicate fleet held position in frustrated impotence, the great work continued. Human ships loaded with archive materials streamed toward hyperspace jumps, carrying the accumulated knowledge of ages to its new sanctuary. Vexstar stood on his observation deck, watching the impossible become reality. In 50 years of dealing with other species, he had learned that most civilizations were ultimately driven by self-interest. The humans were different. They remembered kindness. They honored debts of gratitude. And when they decided to help, they didn't do it halfway. As the last transport ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, Commander Thorn appeared one final time on his communication screen. "Curator Vexar, the new archive complex on Ross 128 is already under construction. State-of-the-art facilities, climate-controlled, and with enough expansion space for the next 1,000 years of galactic knowledge. There's a permanent position, waiting for you as head curator, if you want it. Vexter's ancient heart swelled with emotions he couldn't name. Commander, I don't know how to thank you, how to thank all of humanity. You don't need to thank us, curator. You gave us a gift. 50 years ago, the gift of tomorrow. Now we're passing it forward. Asterisk, the Great Library heist. The evacuation of the Keelian archives had been planned as a careful, methodical operation. 3 days to relocate the most critical materials, then a gradual transfer of the remaining collections over several months. The Syndicate's threat had compressed that timeline to impossible parameters. But humans had a tendency to redefine impossible. Captain Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, watching his tactical display with grim satisfaction. The first wave of archive transports had successfully jumped to hyperspace 12 hours ago. The second wave was loading now, guided by human logistics coordinators who seemed to treat the impossible like a routine Tuesday. Captain, we've got a problem, his communications officer reported. Long-range sensors are picking up Syndicate reinforcements. Looks like Director Voss called in favors. We're looking at approximately 200 corporate security vessels, including 3 Dreadnought-class ships. Chen studied the tactical display. The Syndicate fleet was still 6 hours out, but when they arrived, they would massively outgun the human evacuation fleet. Worse, the Federation injunction that had been protecting them was already under legal challenge. Corporate lawyers were very good at finding loopholes. How much more do we need to evacuate? Chen asked. Engineering estimates another hours for the critical archives, 72 for the complete collection, his tactical officer replied. And we've got maybe 6 hours before the Syndicate decides to stop playing legal games and start shooting. Chen opened a channel to Commander Thorne, who was coordinating the ground operations from the main archive complex. Commander, we need to accelerate the timeline. The Syndicate is bringing serious firepower, and I don't think our volunteer fleet is equipped for a shooting war. Thorne's image appeared on screen, her face streaked with dust and fatigue. Behind her, Chen could see humans and Keelians working side by side, carefully packing irreplaceable knowledge crystals. How long do we have, Marcus? 6 hours, maybe less. Can you prioritize the most critical materials? Already doing it, but Marcus, we're not just talking about books and data files here. Some of these knowledge crystals contain the complete cultural memory of extinct species, the last songs of the Melodian civilization, the mathematical theorems that allowed the builders to create their megastructures. If we leave this behind, it's gone forever. Chen understood. This wasn't just about keeping a promise to an old friend. This was about preserving the irreplaceable heritage of galactic civilization itself. What do you need from me, Commander? Time. Marcus, just give me more time. Chen closed the channel and turned to his crew. His tactical officer was Lieutenant Sarah Park, a young woman whose grandparents had been on that colony ship Vextar, saved 50 years ago. His chief engineer was Commander Ahmed Hassan, whose daughter was currently working in the archives below, helping to catalogue ancient Keelian poetry. This wasn't just a mission for them. It was family, all right, people. We need to buy time for the evacuation, ideas. We could try to delay the Syndicate fleet, Park suggested. Deploy sensor decoys, force them to conduct security sweeps, slow their approach. Good thinking. What else? Hassan spoke up from the engineering station. What if we accelerated the evacuation itself? I've been looking at the archive transport protocols. They're being very careful, very methodical. But what if we didn't have to be? Explain. The humans brought quantum storage devices, right? High compression data crystals. But we're still using the original Keelian storage methods for most of the transfer. What if we converted everything to human storage formats? We could compress the entire remaining archive into maybe 200 data cores. Park frowned. The conversion process would be incredibly risky. One error and we could lose centuries of irreplaceable information. So we don't make errors, Chen said simply. Hassan, how long for the conversion? With every qualified technician, we have maybe 18 hours. But Captain, the risk is worth it. Park, start deploying those sensor decoys. I want the syndicate fleet moving at a crawl. Hassan, get me every data compression expert in the fleet. We're going to do something that's either brilliant or completely insane. What followed was the most intensive data transfer operation in galactic history. Human-computer specialists worked alongside Keelian archivists, converting millennia of accumulated knowledge into compressed quantum storage formats. University students who had volunteered for a simple evacuation mission found themselves handling irreplaceable artifacts. Retired engineers came out of retirement to jury-rig storage systems that had never been designed to work together. Dr. Alina Rodriguez, a data compression specialist from the University of New Geneva, found herself working directly with High Curator Vextar himself, converting the oldest archives. Curator, this crystal contains what appears to be the complete historical records of the Vorthan Empire. We're talking about a civilization that spanned 3 galaxies. How do we compress something like this without losing essential context? Old claws traced the surface of the ancient crystal, his sensory frills displaying colors of deep concentration. Dr. Rodriguez, the Vorthons believed that all knowledge was interconnected. Each piece of information contains references to dozens of others. If we preserve those connections, we could create a self-indexing database. Rodriguez exclaimed. The compressed data would actually be more accessible than the original format. Curator, you're brilliant. I am old, Doctor. You are brilliant. I am simply pointing you toward wisdom that others discovered long ago. As human and Keelian teams worked around the clock to convert the archives, the syndicate fleet crept closer. Captain Chen's delaying tactics were working, but time was running out. The corporate security forces had detected the sensor decoys and were moving more aggressively. Then the unexpected happened. Captain, I'm reading new hyperspace signatures, Park reported. Multiple fleets dropping out of jump space. Chun's heart sank. More syndicate reinforcements would end any hope of completing the evacuation. But the ships that materialized weren't. Corporate vessels, the first fleet bore the elegant designs of the Altarian Republic. The second carried the distinctive energy, signatures of the Centauri Federation. The third was unmistakably Rigelian. Incoming communication, Captain, multiple channels. Put them on screen. The bridge's main display split into 3 sections, showing the commanders of each alien fleet. Chen recognized Admiral Kethera of the Altarians, but the other 2 were unfamiliar. Captain Chen, Admiral Kethera, spoke first, her crystalline voice carrying harmonics of determination. The Altarian Republic cannot stand by while the cultural heritage of the galaxy is destroyed for corporate profit. We offer our assistance. The Centauri commander, a tall humanoid with golden skin, nodded agreement. The Centauri Federation concurs. Our ancestors' historical records are stored in those archives. We will defend them. The third commander, representing the Rigelian collective, added, "Many species have knowledge preserved in the Keelian archives. This is not just humanity's fight anymore." Chen felt a surge of hope, but also concern. "Admirals, I appreciate your support, but this could escalate into a full-scale conflict. Are your governments prepared for that?" Captain Admiral Cathara replied, "When word spread of humanity's mission to save the archives, it resonated. Across dozens of worlds, civilizations that had forgotten their debts to the Keelian preservationists suddenly remembered. We are here not as government fleets, but as volunteers, just like you." The tactical situation had changed dramatically. What had been a desperate evacuation was now a coalition of species united in a common cause. But Director Voss and the Syndicate weren't backing down. "All vessels, this is Syndicate Director Voss," came the transmission from the corporate fleet. "You are interfering with a legal salvage operation. Disperse immediately, or we will consider you hostile." Chen opened a channel to all ships in the coalition fleet. "Director Voss, this is Captain Chen. We're not interfering with your salvage operation. We're conducting a cultural preservation mission under Article 15 of the Galactic Heritage Protection. Accords. Feel free to salvage whatever's left after we're done. There won't be anything left. You're stealing the entire planet's assets." Actually, came a new voice over the communication channel. "They're not." The speaker was Supreme Arbitrator Yelenth of the Galactic Federation Council, appearing on screen from what was clearly an emergency session chamber. "Director Voss, I've just finished reviewing the emergency appeals filed by 17 different species regarding the Keelian archive situation. The Federation Council has voted to invoke the Cultural Heritage Emergency Protocols. The Keelian archives are hereby designated as a protected galactic resource. Any attempts to dismantle or monetize the archives are suspended pending a full investigation into corporate practices regarding cultural preservation." Voss's reptilian features contorted with rage. "This is preposterous. The law is clear. Debts must be paid." "The law is indeed clear, Director," the arbitrator replied calmly. "But so are the Federation's obligations to preserve the cultural heritage of member species. Your corporation will receive full compensation for the debt default paid from the Federation Cultural Preservation Fund. The archives, however, remain off." Chen watched as the Syndicate fleet held position, their commanders clearly receiving new orders. After several tense minutes, the corporate ships began jumping back to hyperspace. Their legal victory turned into a public relations disaster. As the immediate threat receded, the evacuation continued with renewed energy. The successful conversion of the archives to quantum storage formats had reduced the timeline from days to hours. More importantly, the new storage system would make the knowledge more accessible than ever before. Dr. Rodriguez emerged from the archives, complex with the final batch of converted data cores, her face glowing with exhaustion and triumph. "Captain, it's done. The complete cultural heritage of 47 civilizations compressed into 212 quantum storage cores. And Curator Vexter was right about the interconnected database concept. The new format will actually allow scholars to cross-reference information between civilizations in ways that were never possible before." High Curator Vexter appeared beside her, his ancient frame supported by a mobility assist device, but his eyes bright with wonder. "Captain Chen, I have spent 2 centuries studying the accumulated knowledge of the galaxy. Today, I learned that the most valuable knowledge cannot be stored in crystals or databases. It can only be found in the hearts of those who choose to act with honor and compassion. As the last transport ships jumped to hyperspace, carrying their precious cargo to the new archive facility on Ross 128, Chen reflected on what they had accomplished. They had started with a simple goal: repay a debt of gratitude. But in the process, they had done something much more significant. They had reminded the galaxy that some things were more important than profit, that knowledge and culture belonged not to those who could afford them, but to all sentient beings, that when civilizations worked together, they could accomplish the impossible. Commander Thorne's voice came over the communication channel one last time. "All ships, this is Commander Thorne, the evacuation is complete. The Keelian archives have been successfully relocated to their new home at Ross 128, the knowledge of 47 civilizations. 12,000 years of accumulated wisdom now rests safely under the protection of the Galactic Heritage Preservation Accords." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight of emotion that reached across species barriers. 50 years ago, High Curator Vextar saved 12,000 human lives by choosing to do what was right rather than what was legal. Today, we had the honor of returning that favor. But more than that, we've been reminded that the greatest treasures in the galaxy are not gold or crystals or planets. They are the bonds of friendship, the debts of honor, and the knowledge that when good beings work together, there is no challenge too great to overcome. The human fleet began its journey home, but they left behind more than just relocated archives. They left behind a new understanding that the galaxy's civilizations were capable of cooperation on an unprecedented scale. The Great Library Heist, as historians would later call it, became a turning point in galactic relations. And High Curator Vextar, now serving as director of the new Keelian archives on Ross 128, made sure that the story of humanity's great debt repayment was carefully preserved for future generations. After all, some stories were too important to lose.